All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another episode of Reactionary Opinions, the most based and reactionary show on the African continent. Boy, oh boy, do we have a show for you this evening. We have the one and only, the most conscious caracal on the African continent as well. The one and only Ernst Van Zyl. Now, Ernst is a guy who is basically a sharpshooter, a straight shooter, and a guy that kind of rose to fame by his amazingly also based Twitter feed. Which, if you don't follow Ernst on Twitter, you're missing out. Really, he's a straight shooter and all of that. So, and then obviously he has his fantastic YouTube channel, Conscious Caracal, where he does a whole bunch of stuff, everything from where he focuses on Afrikaans culture, farm murders, and loads of other things, philosophy, all kinds of stuff. Had a very interesting guy on his show the other day, Robert Dagan, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but anyway, he was on his show as well. Loads of very interesting guys. Of course, yours truly and Sir Russell the Based and Mr. Patriarch were on the show. Speaking about those gentlemen, how are you doing, Sir Russell the Based?
Well, I'm doing good. I'm glad the week's over. Ready to discuss on a cold wintry night all things communitarianism.
Yeah, it's pretty cold here in the Cape. Mr. Patriarch, you feeling the chills there too, my brother?
Yes, quite cold, but I am warmed in the heart by right-wing extremism. For I have just announced the launch of a new series I'm going to be beginning. I have released an introductory video to a in-depth historical series on fascism. So I'm looking forward to beginning that. I'm doing that to keep myself busy. So if you want to check out my channel, Mr. Patriarch, to stay in tune for the latest developments in that, I would be happy to see you.
Sure, and we'll see how long Dylan's channel lasts with putting out fascism propaganda. Anyway,
a historical treatment, YouTube. Do you hear that? It's a historical treatment.
Anyway, we truly did save the best for last. Mr. Ernst Van Zyl, how are you doing, my kind sir?
I'm doing very well, Mr. Scott, and both the McLarens and Mr. Dylan. I've been very busy with work, but thank you very much for having me on. I'm always keen to have an excellent discussion, and I'm looking forward to see where the conversation tonight goes.
Great. So obviously the title of the video is Communitarianism is the Future, or the future is communitarianism. Now, myself, Russell, and Dylan often talk about building communities, building strong communities. We feel that the community is essentially an extension of the family. We reject the hyper-individualism or the ideological view of individualism, and more sort of adapt the idea of building strong communities, because the community is a model of the family, large in our opinion. Ernst, why don't you just sort of give us a rundown of what your idea or what you think communitarianism is in your mind?
So I think a lot of people have the misconception that communitarianism is this broad ideology or normative ideology, like, for example, liberalism or communism, where they think that it's the success recipe where it tells you how to run a state, and this is how you succeed, and this is how you gain prosperity. But that can't be farther from the truth. Communitarianism is more of a plea to reality in regards to human nature. I think that's one of the big things, is that when you look at the world through a communitarian lens, you're not looking at it through a status lens. That's why I think the biggest mistake you can make when it comes to communitarianism or community is to ask the question, but what would a communitarian or community-based state look like? I don't think that's really the right question. The right question would be, but what does a communitarian perspective really gain or give you in terms of understanding the world and making sense of the world around you? And I think you could really sum up the basic tenets of communitarianism as a plea to give communities the freedom to determine their own destiny, take their destinies, their safety, their management into their own hands, But at the same time, it's not, like I said, a statist model where it says this is how the state or government needs to look. It's more of a supplement. I mean, you can, within a libertarian or liberal or any type of statist model, there can still be calls for more communitarianism within that system. Doesn't mean that community-based model is going to take over the system. It's only that people are fighting to give their communities enough room and enough freedom and space to be able to determine their own destinies. I think that's the important thing. And something else that needs to be noted is that community-based ideologies really function in regards to, if you think about it in terms of one size fits all. That's why it isn't very fruitful to think about communitarianism as an ideology, because then you'd have to start thinking in imperialist terms in regards to, we know how the world works, we know what's best for you. Communitarianism is what's best for you, therefore you need this, and you need to be able to, or you need to adhere to this formula. And that can't be farther from the truth. It's rather that people just want the freedom and the space to be able to determine their own destinies. And you can see it in the real world. I mean, you can see it with a canton system in Switzerland. That's a very good example. You can see it within the Constitution of India. A lot more community-based and cultural freedom within the Indian Constitution than the South African one. And I mean, at the same time, you can then also look at the alternatives, South Africa being an example of an alternative, where there's a lot bigger focus on unity, but a unity not of communities, but a unity of individuals. That's why I find it quite ironic that our label or our symbol is the rainbow, when the rainbow is quite visibly a collection of communities, a collection of colors, rather than a bunch of colors just mixed together to create this formless gray mass, which is kind of the opposite of communitarianism, where you have this individualist approach to society, where you'd rather just have a holistic state reigning over everyone as a collection of individuals rather than a collection of communities, because that's how the neoliberals and the liberals think we're going to solve the world's problems and conflict, seeing as all this conflict sprouts from the cleavages between cultures and religions and languages. If only we can destroy all these differences and give everyone the same language, the same religion, or absence of religion, if you will, and the same cultural beliefs and values, then we will be able to have world peace and destroy all conflict and difference. But unfortunately, as we've seen, I mean, South Africans have experienced firsthand, that's not how the theory works out in practice.
So it's essentially what communitarianism is in your mind is essentially sort of a backbone for a society or a group or a community to form an identity, and then it makes that community stronger within that thing. And it's kind of like you said, like an additive to a community instead of just a group of individuals that want to do their own thing, kind of thing. You know, the liberal idea of, you know, do whatever you want, as long as it doesn't offend or doesn't affect anyone else, you know, which is, you know, we all know that in all practicality that does not.
Flip Base, the head of the Solidarity Movement, not the Solidarity Movement, the head of the Solidarity Union, puts it so well. He says, liberalism is all for individual freedom in South Africa, but heaven forbid you want to open an Afrikaans primary school or Afrikaans school for young children, then it's going to be a big problem. Then you can't have that, and that's a problem. But if you want to fight for your right to smoke what you want, then liberalism is very much on your side.
Yeah, everything degenerate liberalism supports. That's the whole idea, and even to a large extent, conservatism, modern day conservatism. I mean, it hasn't conserved anything. That's why myself, Dylan, and Russell also we speak against modern conservatism as well.
Probably conservative ink more like. I see here in the private chat, not in the live chat, Dylan says that communitarianism is the inverse of John Lennon's Imagine. Yes, imagine a song that goes, imagine a world with very defined boundaries, a world where everyone has the freedom to look after their possessions, not a world without possessions, and a world where everyone has the freedom to determine their own destiny. I mean, that's a much more beautiful song to me than
I'm sure even liberals would love that. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they won't. Russell, you look like you wanted to ask.
The root of all evil.
Yeah, look. So Ernst, to summarize, communitarianism is simply people centered around a particular common interest or identity coming together and forming communities around first of all, having the freedom to do this, and forming communities where they live out their own set of values, whether they're etc., within a broader society. What you're not advocating is a state model. You're advocating the freedom, grassroots model with the whatever happens at the state happens at the state, correct? And then then the state must just allow the model of communitarianism to work on the ground. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yes, I would actually go as far as to say that anyone that holds communitarian views would understand that the fight for community is a constant fight, whether that be in a liberal democracy or in an authoritarian regime. You're never going to be in power, because being in power means that the state represents one of the communities. And unless you're living in a completely homogenous state, that's not going to be possible to have a state that represents all communities. So the thing about when you think about things in terms of community, it's rather a constant fight for giving yourself enough space, a fight for that freedom to determine your own destiny and have your destiny in your own hands. And you're always going to have, whether it be individualists or statists, trying to compromise your vision or your dream of being able to determine your own destiny. There's always going to be a fight. And I think that's the thing about community, is there's always going to be a foe. It's not a utopian view. And I think that's something that maybe to really round off the definition, is that communitarianism is absolutely not utopian. It doesn't, communitarianism does not say that all communities will succeed if they are just given the freedom to do so. They should at least be given the freedom. That's the whole thing. But whatever they do with that freedom, that's up to them. I remember when I was on Jeremy Nell's program to talk about it, one of the guys in the comments, obviously a liberal guy, was very snarky. He's like, but isn't the Chaz or the Chop an excellent example of communitarianism in action? I'm like, yeah, it's a shitty community. It's in a community, yes, but you could technically have a community of communists. It would be a community. You would be able to grant them the freedom to determine their destiny and to be able to take their community management into their own hands. But whether that succeeds or not, that's going to be up to them, man. That's not. That's why I'm saying.
And also, they need to. And also, I mean, obviously, that community must be given the freedom, but then they've also got to take the responsibility for whatever happens as well. That's the other thing. You know what I'm saying? You know,
it's like that quote from Anchorman, where they have that perfume in Anchorman. I think it's like Black Panther perfume or Jaguar perfume, and the tagline is like something like 70% of the time it works every time. But a community is not, it doesn't work like that. A community is not 70% of the time it works every time. You have so many cases of communities catastrophically failing. And it's not because a community or a people coming together to work together as a community always works. It's rather that the best success stories you'll ever see is where people were given that freedom to do it. But it doesn't mean it's going to work every time. So you could take, for example, the moon landing. The moon landing is an excellent example of a nation or a large community coming together to achieve something. It's not a group of scientists coming together to achieve the moon landing in the name of science. It's rather driven by something bigger, something more untangible, a patriotism or a feeling of I need to prove something as a larger group. And I think that's where communitarianism is actually a very useful tool in regards to understanding the world around us, because it's not something that has a finite scale. You can see a community can be as small as 15 people getting together, or it can be as large as a nation. It could be possible, but the community ceases keeping to communitarian ideals as soon as it becomes imperialist, where it starts expanding outside of its borders and no longer cares just about itself, but starts acting like an empire, where you no longer just keep yourself preoccupied with your own duties and responsibilities to yourself and your people and your community, but you start becoming obsessed with the duties and responsibilities of the groups around you. That's when a community becomes imperialist, and that's what we need to fight against.
Yeah. So, sorry, Russell, I just want to add something there. Ernst, talking about what you just said over there, patriotism and all of that. I'm sure a lot of libertarians, liberals, and all of them will accuse you of being collectivist. Those very same people that love Manchester United, they love the idea of the team playing and stuff, and not just like one guy on the field running around chasing a ball, But you're being such a collectivist, Ernst, because you've got to do these things all one person. It's like the idea of Elon Musk, where he sent those rockets up to space. It was him
on his own. He used his mind and he made it manifest.
It was just him. It was just him, Ernst. It was him alone. He fastened every nut, fastened every bolt, engineered every trail, worked out every chart to get that shuttle or get that rocket into space. It was him alone that did that.
And I think that's one of the things that we need to realize. I think that's a realization that I came to a bit late. Was that the big liberal mantra is identity politics evil, identity politics bad, collectivism bad. But then you have the same people that care about, I know these people that are liberal, but they care about for example, their Afrikaans language, or they care about their heritage, or they care about their culture. My friend Odin Moja on Twitter, you might know him as Wotan, made a very good point. He said, if you care about language, then you are a collectivist in a large extent. You can't be an individualist and care about language, because language by definition requires at least two people. One person that can speak it and one person that can understand it. Otherwise, it doesn't serve any type of purpose. Otherwise, language is redundant.
Correct.
So any type of language issue, if you care about, for example, your Afrikaans language, or even about your German language or Croatian language or whatever type of language, that is a collectivist or an identity politics cause. And that's the thing about identity politics, is that if you become, and I think this is my big word, I'm kind of a bit rambling with this, but I think it's an important point. When you look at, for example, the DA, one of the Democratic Alliance in South Africa, one of their big talking points now post-election, now that they've lost a lot of their support, was that we became too identity politics obsessed. And that's what they're hearing from a lot of their liberal advisors. But my big concern on their behalf, not that I'm a DA voter, is that they become so obsessed with being anti-identity politics now that they will completely just lose touch with South African politics. South African politics is defined by culture and language and communities and by identity. This is a fact that even the liberals acknowledge. And if you were to completely turn your back on identity politics and completely devote yourself to, this is a nation of individuals that make individual choices and vote on their individual beliefs, you're just gonna fall completely off the bus. And I think that
100%. Look, the thing is, Ernst, I don't think that communitarianism, the way you've explained it, is any way collectivist. A collectivist is for something to be collectivist, it has to enforce an ideology on a mass group of people. And the way you've explained it, way you've explained it to me, it doesn't. The communitarianism, as you have explained it to me, does not have that nature.
But collectivism does involve a collective. It does involve a collection of people. I think in that regard,
absolutely. In that sense, it's a collectivist. But the real kicker for collectivism, as we know it, the real part about it is the kind of a panel beating of a group of people into submission. That's the real. That's the element of collectivism that people want to try and avoid.
Right. No, I completely agree.
which your explanation of communitarianism dismisses.
Yeah. And I think, but that's the thing, is that we need to have these types of definitions, because to me, thinking in terms of collectives means something completely different. When I think about a collective, I just think about a collection of people coming together to try and achieve something, whether that be a language community or a cultural community or an ideological community even. I don't think the history is not fraught with a bunch of stories of individuals that did incredible things. You have here and there's some examples, but if you look at the broader picture, it is much more a narrative or a story of people coming together and achieving great things. I've become a bit disillusioned with the facts don't care about your feelings mantra that the right has kind of adopted recently, or because it helped us win. I don't completely agree with facts don't care about your feelings, because facts don't care about your feelings. Logic tells you as well, your wife is probably not one of the most important people in the world. Your children or your child is probably not statistically one of the most valuable objects in the world. Sorry, buddy. Your God probably does not exist if we look at the science and the statistics. Your feeling about there's some type of higher meaning or order to the world, statistically speaking, is probably not correct. Facts don't care about your feelings. That is a very empty and sterile way at looking at the world, but it is a very effective view if you want to win. If your only view is to try and win and to try and really beat your opponents into a pulp in the short term. But in the long term, you have to understand, let's take our movement and kind of give it a broader label. The conservative or traditionalist movement, whatever you want to call it, is not, our mantra is not facts don't care about your feelings. At the very core of conservatism is a very strong feeling for the unseen, for something that is not empirical, for some things that are not cold, hard, sterile science. And to completely abandon that element of your ideology or your worldview just in order to win, so that you can adopt a saying like facts don't care about your feelings. Facts don't care about your feelings is a liberal mantra. It is the mantra of academics. It is the mantra of we only care about the numbers. We don't care about anything that we cannot prove scientifically and empirically. And that is at the very core of what's wrong with our world today, man. We've just overanalyzed everything, and we've just taken everything that we used to focus on in regards to the unseen world, and the world that was not empirical, and the things that the matters of the heart and the soul, and we just threw it out the window and said it's not important anymore. These things, there always used to be a very clear divide within human knowledge in regards to the sciences, the empirical sciences, and the more metaphysical, unseen sciences. Every science had its physical and its more unseen counterpart. You had chemistry and alchemy. You had psychology and psychoanalysis. You had metaphysics and physics. There was always this dichotomy between the unseen and the seen, and both these sides were equally respected. And then somewhere in the 1800s, we just decided we are going to just relegate ourselves to the world of the senses. Anything you can't prove empirically has no place in intellectual discussion, and it simply doesn't exist. And that's how we got to the point where Nietzsche was able to say that God is dead and we've killed him, because we willingly went down that path.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
That Robert did mention on your show. Sorry, Dylan, something that Robert did mention on your show was that no one seems to question Nietzsche, and it's like the most bizarre thing ever. But yeah, you're right. So we basically allowed him to say things like that. God is dead. Anyway, D-Dog, take her over.
Yeah, sure. So there's a few points I'd like to make here. So I'll start back chronologically and move forward. So first was about this idea of identity politics. So as I have said before, when we had Dumo on the show, all politics is identity politics to a certain extent. And I feel like the problem with the DA and their identity politics angle, if you want to call it that, is what the identity politics they were engaging in is the sort of identity politics where you get a focus group of experts to come in and be like, all right, so according to, this sociologist here and this, diversity appointee we have, what should be our identity angle here for the DA? That's a sort of identity politics they were pandering to, a very synthetic, not real, manufactured type of identity politics. And it blew up in their face because the ANC and the EFF owned that ground, right? So, but if they sort of came at it from a more angle, like your dignity as human beings is being undermined by the current regime, the elites don't care about you, they have replaced your traditional cultures and way of life with a hollow, welfare-addicted, poverty-stricken, and morally bankrupt state of affairs. We are here to try and rebuild that, but this time also make you rich, help us make South Africa great again, sort of thing. If they had a message like that, which is, you could say, an identity politics sort of angle, I think that would have resounded much, much stronger. And it's also not, it's not pandering, I don't really think, because it's touching into something very real. And the other thing too is it doesn't alienate, half their voting base also, because, people like us, we could hear that and be like, yeah, damn right. That's true. And the second point had to do with this notion of, the Ben Shapiro line. Facts don't care about your feelings. My wife's a doctor, and facts don't care about your feelings. The other angle to that is feelings don't care about your facts, right? So this is going back into thinking that people are essentially like, or they should be like little computers. 1 + 1 is 2. Aggregate demand is decreased. Increased government expenditures, and and to get aggregate demand up, bop, beep, boop, beep. It's thinking about society like we're robots, but we're not. Human beings. It's a fundamental misunderstanding about how people operate and think. We intuit lots of things. We intuitively know certain things and can glean information based on experience without necessarily having data to back it up. So, and this goes the last point on the Nietzsche point. This whole scientism, that's sort of the term for it, is this idea that you can just boil down everything to empirical data. If I can't put it on a graph or show it to you in a book, it doesn't exist, sort of thing. Right. That's a very, it's a very limited way of looking at the world. And to prove this, numbers, right? So the number 5 doesn't exist. Right? It's a mental construct, if you want to call it that. Nevertheless, without the number 5, nothing makes sense, right? I can't build a building. I can't, course or chart the trajectory of a projectile. I can't do many, many, many things without the number 5. Nevertheless, it's immaterial, yet it is very much real in that sense. So, yeah, this whole scientism mindset, I think a lot of us need to sort of get out of that. And there's types of proof which aren't necessarily the kinds that you would find in biology, for instance.
Yeah. And I just find it very funny if you ever...
That's what Dylan was talking about, summarized into that one guy that at the braai shouts at you, "It's effing science." Anyway.
Right. I mean, you just have to look at human history to really see that point where, like I said earlier, the moon landing wasn't motivated by a bunch of scientists that got together and we're going to do this for the glory of science and for humanity. No, there was a very American-centric thing. The Americans said, we're going to do this for us, fuck the rest. We're not doing this for the South Africans. We're not doing this for the Russians. This is not the global collective achievement of humanity. This is American achievement. Fuck you. And you can look at South African history as well. The Boers, let's take the one of the greatest origin stories of the Boers, the Battle of Blood River, where a few thousand Boers were up against tens of thousands of Zulus. and they made a covenant with God, and not one Boer was slain. Those Boers were motivated and filled with certainty and with passion and with willpower through their belief, not because one Boer stood up and said, I've calculated the statistics and it says that we actually have a very strong chance of winning here. No, it was just the Boers put their faith in their God, and they put their faith in something that's not empirical, something that can't be proven scientifically, and it got them through that. I don't think the Boers would have been able to win that battle without their faith, or without the strength of will and character and resolve that granted them. And that's one of the great Afrikaner Boer stories. I mean, the Boer War is another great example. I don't think the Boers were, when they were fighting for their culture against one of the greatest empires this planet has ever known, they were thinking, okay, so we've calculated the numbers and it says we have a very good chance of winning this war. No, they looked at their situation. They said, whatever happens, we're going to fight for what's right and fight for what we believe in. And we're going to stand up for our culture and our heritage and for our people. And that's, again, not a facts don't care about your feelings. That is a feelings beat the ever-loving shit out of your statistics if enough people get together and believe in it. So, and you can look at it. Just think to yourself right now of some of the best speeches you've ever heard in your life. Those speeches aren't, let me cite some statistics for you to get you really excited. No, those speeches are, this is how the world works. This is how it is. This is what we are made of. This is what I'm made of. This is what I will do as a leader for you. It's not some scientist standing there on the podium saying, so if you look at the graph, it is more of someone just there spilling their emotion and their soul onto a crowd and enchanting that crowd in that way. The best orators in the world are not people with a laser pointer pointing at a little graph on a screen, but rather people that are just standing there giving their raw emotion. I mean, that's anyone that's
so they're not libertarians, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah, so Ernst, I was actually chatting to a mate earlier on today about this exact thing. If we take South Africa as an example, I mean, how South Africa looks at the current moment, I mean, it's an absolute disaster. I mean, every day there's some new, horrendous thing that the government is doing. And it's just failure after failure after failure after failure every single day. Okay, and what does the average South African guy do? Okay, you can do one of two things. You can either carry on with your life and just say, well, I'm just going to have to ride the storm or whatever it is, or you can do what our ancestors did. And our ancestors saw a situation that was rough. I mean, I'm like, myself and Russell and stuff come from 1820 settler stock. Those are our ancestors here in Africa. And they arrived here with next to nothing. They were shafted by the crown, and they saw this dangerous country and stuff that now they need to build. So what did they do? They built. They carried on, and they made something of it. Okay. So there's two people in South Africa. There's the people that are just going to sit there and ride the storm. Okay. And then there's the person that's going to sit there and that's going to build. Okay. That's going to, like Martin Luther said, if I knew Jesus was coming tomorrow, I'd plant a tree. Okay. You have to start building the kingdom. Okay. And it's this idea of, I know that you are not really a big fan of Cape secession and stuff practically and all of that. I know that. Hang on, I'll let you rebut in a sec. I know that you're not a fan of it, but I just want to. The reason why I support it, okay, is not for the fact that I think that it is probable or even that it is going to sort of just slide through and everything will be fine. That's not the reason why I support it. The reason why I support it is what I want to see happening in South Africa is a mass awakening of self-determination. So this idea that people now need to take the opportunity to build their own future. Okay, because guess what? We are the Rhodesians back in those days now. We are alone. Okay, no one's going to come and save us. No one's going to, like for someone like myself and Russell, who can't just jump on a plane and bugger off to Australia or the UK or whatever it is. Okay, there's going to be a lot of those oaks in South Africa, and a lot of those oaks are going to need to do something about it. So the idea of us as having to now go at this alone, we're going to have to start building strong communities in order to do that, and that's why I support the Cape Secession idea. But anyway.
Yeah, man. But I think because Cape Secession is such a hot button topic at the moment, that's why I've been mentioning it in almost every appearance and show that I've been doing. But I think my point specifically there is, again, I think I have to preface it with the fact that I've got a lot of respect for their bold ideas. I love an anti-establishment person, whether they be a left-wing or right-wing. But at the same time, I see them making mistakes that I've seen a lot of movements throughout history make, and that is being consumed by their idealism or by the utopianism, where they are, and I'm talking from what I've seen personally. They can correct me if they want. I mean, I've talked to Phil Craig on my show, very interesting guy. They are too obsessed or focused on the trivial but fun stuff. Like, this is what our national anthem is going to be. This is what our flag's going to look like. This is where our border is going to be. This is going to be our national animal. This is going to be our national colors. This is the very trivial stuff, the last little icing on the cake, but the fun stuff, the stuff that when you're going to start a band, you're like, what's the band's name going to be? Where's our first gig going to be? Not even talking about who's going to be the guitarist, who's going to be the vocalist. Are you any good? Can any of your mates even play an instrument? No, this is what we're going to call the band. This is what this is going to be our, if we're going to do our world tour, this is going to be the first country we visit. This is going to be our first song's name. The fun stuff, the stuff that you kind of do at the end, but they are too obsessed with those things or too preoccupied with that, rather than the nitty-gritty, very hard stuff in terms of state-proofing your communities. And I mean, unfortunately, this book is not translated in English, but the book by Flip Bass, Die Pad na Selfbestuur, the Path to Self-Determination, is pretty much a guideline in regards to how to achieve it. And in that book, he explains the first step is state-proofing your community, making sure you can do everything yourself, chipping away at every facet of your community where you need the government to do anything. And then after you've become completely practically independent, you can say, okay, I'm drawing the border here, raising my flag, done. This is my country's name. That's the last thing you do. That's like the icing on the cake. But that's the easy part. The hard part is making your community independent and making your community state-proof. Because state-proofing your community means taking responsibility, not giving up responsibility. Saying to the government, I'm going to do that. You don't have to do that for me anymore. I'm going to take that burden and willingly put it on my shoulders. But that's not fun. That's not how humans are wired. Humans are wired to give up burdens, not to take burdens. Especially the modern man. The modern man just wants to maximize the amount of burden he can put on someone else's shoulders, or ideally the state's shoulders. And I think that's where this misconception or this wrong focus comes in when it comes to secession. People are thinking about the icing on the cake rather than how they're going to actually make the cake themselves. And that's the big thing, is people need to start thinking in regards to not what's the country's name going to be, what's the currency's name going to be, how's our flag going to look. Rather, how are we going to function running our own police? How are we going to function running our own military? Where are our ports of trade going to be? Which countries are going to trade with us and which countries are going to shun us? What are we going to do how are we going to function as a smaller country neighboring a hostile majority force? A country that's not going to be very friendly towards you, let's be honest. The ANC is not going to do you any favors. They're going to try and sabotage you at every turn, even if you achieve this. Those are the hard questions that you need to address. Not what's going to be your national animal, whatever. how are you going to function with an openly hostile force next to you that has a military, that has an economy that is hundreds of times larger than yours, a country that has a population that's much larger than yours? And what are you going to do when things become too prosperous in your own country? What are you going to do when you actually have a surplus of job opportunities and people start knocking on your borders from South Africa that's dysfunctional and socialist? What are you going to do?
Look, Ernst, people do definitely jump the gun into all the icing on the cake stuff. But some of the things that you're talking about is also icing on the cake stuff. Things like who you're going to trade with, the hostiles, that's also icing on the cake stuff, actually. All right. Because that is also one of the things, if you've got the will to go it on your own, you'll have the will to take and meet every challenge along the way. Okay. So that's my kind of view on that. Yes, there are a lot of interests in the icing on the cake stuff, like the emblems and the flower and the national animal and the flag. Yes, and all those sort of things. But the things you mentioned, like who you're going to trade with, what are you going to do about a hostile partner, that's also icing on the cake, just like the flag and just like the animal. It is actually the icing on the cake.
What Russell's trying to say is that the first job is to get the will of the people behind you. So get the will.
Well, that's what you've got to do. If people have got the will, they can do amazing things. If people come together around a cause or something, they can do amazing things. And that's the essential thing. But I would actually like to leave the whole Cape secession thing aside for a moment and just discuss. I wanted to just bring up practically. You just mentioned that book behind you on the shelf. That mentioned the road to self-determination or self-management. And I would actually like, what if a community is going to, if you've got a community of, say, a few thousand people, how are they going to, how does Flipbase lay out a framework in which to work for communities? I'd really like to know that.
Well, his framework is very simple in regards to you. Firstly, he assumes that you're finding yourself in a dispensation like South Africa, where you're in a democracy and you're not happy with the outcomes of it. The first step is going to be, you're going to have to state-proof your communities and become as independent as possible. You need to take as many of the safety, the facets of safety, economics, transport, everything that you can, you need to take into your own hands as far as you can in terms of capacity. Because I think this actually links up to what you were saying. Yes, those are not the things that you, for example, who you're going to trade with and national security or whatever. Those aren't things that you need to worry about from the start. But you also need to start thinking you're like a dog chasing a car. You need to know what you're going to do when you catch it. So when you get your independence and then you start realizing, oh, dang, I didn't think about what I'm going to do, because there's a country with 45 million people that surrounds me on all sides almost, that's openly hostile towards me, and they're making my life very miserable in terms of trade and diplomacy and their relation to the rest of the world, and they're using their allies like China and other countries against me. You kind of need to take those things into account. It's going to make things very hard for you, but I think that's where reality comes in. I think the big issue that people have is that they think that it's going to be easy, and it's definitely not. And that's why I say people need to follow the Urania model, where you have a collection of Boers that say, we're going to take the objectively worst piece of land in this country, mathematically proven worst piece of objectively shitty land, and we'll take that. Just give us that. All we want is our freedom. We want our freedom, and we'll take that piece of land. That's the type of approach that these people need to start considering. Because like I've mentioned in previous conversations as well, it needs to stop being a conversation of what do I want, and rather a conversation of what am I willing to give up, where later I've chopped up so many things that the only thing that's left is my freedom, because that's what matters to me. And that's the approach that the Urania people, the Urania movement made, where they said, we're willing to give up everything. We're not asking for a city. We're not asking for a third of the country. We're not asking for anything. We just want this little piece of desert so we can be free with our culture. And I think, not saying that the Cape independence movement needs to fight just to have a little town in the Western Cape, but they shouldn't be thinking in terms of we want the Western Cape and the Northern Cape and the Eastern Cape. I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say I've seen these oaks talk about we want the Eastern Cape and the Northern Cape and we want it all, everything with the word Cape in it. That's not going to happen. You're going to have to work within the framework where you realize you're going to be negotiating with an openly hostile force, a force that is going to try and trip you at every turn. And you're not going to win. Yes, if you take a Trumpian approach where you do the big ask and that means you get more than you actually wanted, sure, you can take that gamble. But you need to know that you're not going to, it's not going to be easy. For example, when I talk to Phil Craig, like I said, I have a lot of respect for Phil. I think I'm really curious about what their movement does. I'm keeping a close eye on them. But our main point of disagreement was the fact that he still has a lot of faith in the ANC's goodwill and the ANC's commitment to democracy, in his own words. I don't. I think if you do a referendum in the Western Cape, and I'm being completely honest and frank, if you do a legitimate referendum, you go to the ANC, they're going to laugh in your face, probably going to piss on the paper that you printed the referendum on. That's my honest opinion. They're not going to give you a third of the country. At the same time, I don't think you should give up. That doesn't mean you need to be blackballed. That doesn't mean you should be, oh, man, everything is lost. We shouldn't try. You should still try. But I want these people to be very, very, very aware about the fact that it's not going to be easy. Their lives are going to be made very difficult. They're going to be attacked from all corners. They're going to be attacked by the government and every type of mechanism the government has, especially if they start achieving success. If they're willing to take that, all power to them. Then I really hope they make it.
In other words,
But if they're not willing to accept that and they just think it's going to be easy and they're relying on the goodwill of the ANC, unfortunately, I can't say I agree with you fully.
I agree with you fully. So all you're asking them is saying, okay, have a strong will for it, but be committed to reality at all costs.
Yes.
So in other words, you're saying have the same attitude as the Boers in the Anglo-Boer War. We don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to push hard nonetheless. We don't know what the future is,
and make peace with the fact that the ANC is going to make your life a living hell.
Oh, well, I mean, the thing is,
absolutely.
I mean, the thing is, I can't believe that. I mean, you're preaching to the converted here. You don't need to tell me that. I mean, the fact is, if you want to actually do something, anything, you have to bring this matter to the fore. You know what I mean? It has to come to the fore.
No,
if it's what you want, bring it to the fore, and then when it's at that point, you deal with the matter there. But don't expect any favors.
So Aaron, the whole logic that I have on this whole thing is, look, can you imagine if the Boers had have just said, Jannie, Sunny, nee, hierdie Engelsmanne kom nou vir ons. Ons gee nou dit hulle gaan my lewe nou regtig erg maak. Ek wil nie meer beklei nie, okay? Can you imagine if the Boers had have done that? What the situation would have been that you would probably have an English surname right now or something, you know? So, you know, the idea of, I get the idea that it's going to be hell. I mean, look, the reality of it is like I said, you have two options. Either you live with the ANC and your life becomes hell, or you stand and you fight and your life becomes hell. So either way, your life is going to become hell. So
give it a crack.
You don't give it a crack, give it a go, you know. And the idea, and I understand that you don't really have that kind of view and stuff. And I mean, you're an Afrikaner heart, you're a Boer, so you understand the logic behind it. You understand, you see eye to eye the same way that myself and Russell see things, you know, this idea that never give up, carry on, and that's the thing, you know. Yeah. My dad always told me, bro, there's no such thing as can't, no such thing.
Yeah. I guess I think if I may interject as the dirty foreigner who can just hop on a plane at any time here, I think here's sort of how I see I don't know how we got talking about capes it, but here's how I see it sort of going down. So I think absolutely pushing for Cape secession is great. I think it's the best thing that could happen for the Western Cape, is if they're able to break off. I think it's a wonderful thing to try and strive for and stuff. And I think Ernst would agree that it would be a great thing if it could happen. I think is just skeptical about the possibility of it. But what I think, and so am I, in the sense that I think Cape Sit would have the same problems that the Confederacy ran into, in that they were paying significantly more taxes than anybody else. So the Confederacy was, and the federal government would have seen their coffers dry up significantly had the South actually seceded. And that's the same sort of case that we find here in South Africa. The Western Cape contributes an enormous amount, disproportionate to its size relative to the rest of South Africa. And I don't think the ANC would want to let that go at all. So even if they don't particularly care about the Cape, they like the Cape's money. So, but what I think could certainly happen is that, let's suppose the referendum happens. Let's suppose that the 75%, or, you know, a sizable majority of the people in the Western Cape want to secede. And the ANC government's like, no, that might not be the end of the story. That could be used as leverage to say, all right, fine, you know, we can't leave, but we're going to keep ramping up this pressure and causing internal turmoil unless you grant us further regional de facto autonomy, right? So if now we have more, like, you know, like we're still paying taxes and whatnot, but we have more freedom to sort of do our own thing. If we're able to use the referendum and independence movements to get concessions in that sense, I think that is quite possible. But I don't know. We'll see. But I wish it all the best either way.
And that's the thing. For me, it's just, I'm just pleading with people to be realistic. I don't want people's dreams shattered. There's nothing more I hate than building people's hopes up with idealism or utopianism. I think it's very cruel. I think it's not something people do intentionally, but it's something humans kind of inherently want to do. Is like, that's why I use the metaphor of when you create a band. I think everyone knows that story of someone that wanted to create this band. They're like, we're going to be the best rock band that this town has ever known. And then that dream just falls flat because they were thinking too utopian. And I think this is how we can tie it back to communitarianism, where every community will not succeed. Every nation will not succeed. Every collection of people is not guaranteed to succeed. The communities that succeed are the communities that show grit, the communities that really show that we are willing to bite the bullet, the communities that will face reality head on, view it straight in the eye, and say we are going to defy whatever obstacle approaches us. And that's what I want. That's why I'm giving this tough love to the secessionist movement, because I find them very interesting. They've got all my support if they can pull it off, and I'm keeping a very close eye on them. But I want them to drop we're depending on the ANC's goodwill and their devotion to democracy. That is absolutely not going to work. And I can tell you that right now. The ANC does not care about democracy. The ANC does not care about some type of ideal devotion to these liberal principles of democracy. I can tell you that. So if they can come to that conclusion, then they can take it forward and realize, okay, this is what we're going to have to do. This is going to how we're going to approach it. It's going to be hard, and that's why I'm saying the ANC is going to make whoever's the head of your movement or the top brass of your movement, the ANC is going to make your life absolute hell. But if you survive and you can make it through that, you will have your independent Cape. That's what I'll tell you. If you can make it through that, you're going to walk over hot coals that the ANC is going to throw in front of you. If you give up, you're not going to get it. But if you make it to the other side, you might very well have your independent Cape. Whether you have those types of leaders will remain to be seen. But that's the type of reality or the realistic view I want to see a bit more from people that support this cause.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% with you, Ernst. You know, we've I've said it a lot on this show. Dylan and Russell might not have said it as harshly as me, but you know, our side or our movement or whatever needs to have I use this word with love, needs to have martyrs. And every great culture or every great movement and stuff had its martyrs, its own martyrs, and the martyr is basically the symbol of a brave man that stood up against all odds to defeat all odds, and inspired the nation and stuff. And look, this is the reality of it. And Sideliner Opinions made a very, very, very true comment over here. Again, Sideline Opinions is always on both of our shows, Ernst. He's always there. Great lad. He says the difference between courage and stupidity is very vague. And I think he's pretty bang on over there. So Dylan, I know that, before we move on to the next topic and stuff, those of you that are watching, I guess there's a lot of interesting comments in the comment section, which we'll get to in a little bit. But I want to touch on the talking about communitarianism and stuff. Ernst, a very, very serious topic that we need to talk about now is the amount of farm murders, farm attacks, specifically in South Africa. What is, in your mind, what is the, I mean, I know that you do a lot of work with these sort of things, but what is the reason in your mind for the spike, and how do farmers go about defending themselves and protecting things?
Well, firstly, I just want to say, if you are here from my Twitter or my YouTube channel and you're watching this show, please click subscribe there to these good lads. They do a lot of excellent content. While the people are watching. And then, in terms of the farm murders, I think something I found very funny. So AfriForum did a media conference on Wednesday where we talked about the latest stats in terms of farm murders since the lockdown began, and also the trends that we've been seeing. And one of the Citizen newspaper in South Africa our entire conference was 95% about farm murders, and there was a sentence in there from Ian Cameron that said farmers need to arm themselves and they need to get their legal firearm licenses. And the Citizen made that their headline. They said AfriForum calls for farmers to arm them, not arm, to take up arms. That was their quote. And I think, but whatever they want to interpret it as, I think Ian makes a very poignant point there. I think the farmers arming themselves and getting ready for when such an attack maybe happens to them is the best thing that they can do. I wrote an article for Firearms Essay, a new website that just launched a few weeks ago, about how gun ownership sets you free, or taking responsibility sets you free. And I think that's really something that a lot of farmers are focusing on. And I think there's a statistic that pretty much exemplifies why this is important. So between the last 3 years, the amount of farm attacks has exponentially increased, but the amount of farm murders annually has stayed relatively the same, which means that there are more farm attacks occurring, but less of them are resulting in death, which means quite logically that farmers are much better prepared and much better organized to deal with these types of attacks. So even though the attacks are increasing, the amounts of murders are not increasing proportionately, which means that farmers are taking initiative, farmers are getting organized. And that would be my big advice, is that farmers start taking this very seriously. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not some type of narrative that's being used to garner your vote or to get your support. This is reality, and this is your life on the line. So I think not even just farmers, my big advice to any South African would be get your legal firearm license, take your safety into your own hands. And by taking your safety into your own hands, you can then start contributing to the security of your community as well. I mean, that is one way of state-proofing your community, is being able to protect your family, and by extension, being able to protect your neighbors and your community. That means you're much less reliant on the state in the form of the police, keeping you safe and keeping you secure. You can take it into your own hands. It's especially important in a situation where the difference between life and death is literally a matter of seconds.
Yeah, I watched that short little documentary that AfriForum made, and it was incredibly difficult to watch. You know how different that situation would have been. You know, that's the thing that goes through your mind when you watch these sort of things. You know, the first thing that you that you think is how different the situation would have been if there had have been an armed, a good guy with a gun. That's the analogy, right? How different that situation would have been. That situation of utter terror. I mean, if you haven't seen the documentary that AfriForum released, I think it was about 2-3 days ago that they released this little documentary. It's about 10 minutes long, and it's about a farm, a couple and their 2-year-old daughter that were attacked. It's horrific. And if that sort of thing doesn't send shivers down your spine, then you know you're a heartless psychopath or sociopath or whatever, psychopath. But how much different the situation would have been if that person had have had a gun to defend his family and protect himself, and that sort of thing. But yeah, that's why do you think, Ernst? Why do you think, particularly during like now, and has there been like a spike or a rise in farm attacks recently?
There has been. There's been, so as we're now currently in level 3. During level 1 and level 2, farm attacks were relatively low compared to previous months, and Ian Cameron explains that as being there's a lot more police presence. There were roadblocks at every point where you are crossing into a new province, a lot more police presence. And during level 3, all that was taken away in a large sense. And that means that there was this big spike in farm murders where suddenly you don't have police presence on provincial borders anymore, this large roadblock presence anymore. So there's a much bigger space for criminals to be moving around. No more risk of their vehicles being searched or them being arbitrarily stopped by the police. And that's created this space where they can just pretty much travel as they want to. And as a result, an increase in farm murders has followed. So I do think the main point here to take away from this in terms of the spike in farm murders, I mean, we had 4 over the weekend, is the fact that a larger police presence, or at least better controls in regards to suspicious vehicles, actually makes a big difference. But also the fact that if you don't have people that are taking these types of things very seriously, you're going to have definitely a big problem on your hands, as we've seen, where increasingly the people that are responding to farm murders are not, or getting first on the scene, are not the police, but rather community organizations and communities coming together with their farm watchers and their farm patrols and Boer groups getting together and organizing to protect each other. They are first on the scene, keeping each other safe. And as we've seen during the lockdown, those types of farm patrols were outlawed during, I think, stage 1 and level 1 and level 2, which is just absolutely bizarre for me. But I mean, that's the type of world that we're living, or the type of country that we're living in, where the ANC would rather pursue a policy path where it centralizes all their power into the hands of the state in regards to providing security, rather than the common sense path of making it as easy as possible for citizens to protect themselves and to organize and to really take a lot of burden off the state's hands in regards to safety and security, basically saying that, don't worry, we'll handle it ourselves.
Ernst, I just saw an interesting comment by Sideline Opinions. Maybe you can quickly run us through it. It says the PAC recently ran a promotion using "one settler, one bullet" as a slogan. Farmers are seen as fair game. AfriForum laid charges against PAC.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's one of the realities of the country that we live in, is the fact that we have mainstream political parties saying things like "one settler, one bullet," very disturbing stuff. And AfriForum did lay a charge against the PAC at the police station. I should know, I was the person that laid charge. So the thing that we're seeing here is definitely you can see it on social media where you have people, I mean, when Ian Cameron posted his tweet about the farm murder that happened in KZN, where a pregnant woman's throat was slit, One of the top comments, or one of the first comments that he got, was from a woman that said, "Oh, more fake news and more lies." So you get this type of response that you don't get with any type of other crime. Where if News 24, for example, said pregnant woman strangled in this township, you wouldn't get in the replies, "Oh, more lies, more fake news." People are like, "Oh, that's tragic. That's very bad. That's absolutely disgusting." I mean, the natural response. But you don't see that with farm murders. With farm murders, you see a very large proportion of online content or people responding to it being malicious and being very disgusting in regards to what they're saying about it. And I think the media are largely complicit in this phenomenon, where you have the South African media, specifically the English media, the mainstream media, not covering the extent of this pandemic of crime, if you will, or this issue. They'd rather focus on other things. They'd rather not keep people under the impression that this is not really such a big problem. And on top of that, they constantly downplay the issue by having editorials written by people that work for these mainstream sources or these mainstream outlets saying, actually, this is just a far-right conspiracy theory. It's not happening. It's all fake. I mean, when the president of South Africa went to the United Nations in 2018 and said, and I quote, "There are no murdering of white farmers in South Africa," zero. The next day, the media did not keep him, hold his feet over the coals. They didn't speak truth to power. What was the headline on News 24? The president's comments about farm murders, what he actually meant, written by the deputy editor to the newspaper. In what society is that the rational or civil response to a president objectively outright lying on a mainstream platform? Imagine the president of South Africa going to the UN and saying, "There is no beating of women in South Africa." Do you think the media would accept that?
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, what really upsets me about in South Africa is, with regards to the corporates and especially corporate media, is that they are so far up the government's backside. It is unbelievable. All right. Everybody in this country is absolutely terrified of this pathetic, really. I don't know what they're so scared of. What are they so afraid of? What are they so afraid of? I want to actually, I'd love to actually sit down and call up all the CEOs of all the big guys, say 12 of them, the head of Naspers, the head of First Rand, the head of whoever, and say, why are you so afraid? Why are you so afraid of the government? Why? What is this? Why are the editors? Why is the editor, the editorials and the basically editors of the newspapers so absolutely terrified of the government? What is this? I'd love to get an honest answer.
And I think something else that I've noticed about the South African media is that they have a very interesting facade that they keep up, where they attack the ANC and they criticize the ANC, but if you look closely, they're attacking a very specific faction within the ANC. They're investigating and criticizing the faction that is opposed to Cyril Ramaphosa, who is the president. They never criticize the president or his allies. They only investigate and criticize his opponents within the party, which I find very interesting and kind of shows you where the media capture has taken place. It's not captured by the ANC, it's captured by a very specific faction within the ANC.
Yeah, but every now and again, though, the media, to give themselves legitimacy, will throw us a bone. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they can't. I mean, they can't be too cartoonish, now, can they?
Yeah, but I mean, generally speaking, I mean, you know, anybody with a bit of a thought process behind it can see. I mean, the thing is, I cannot believe. I mean, how the hell Cyril Ramaphosa can still have this so-called 60 or 70% approval rating is. That is a blatant lie. There is absolutely no ways he has got that approval rating. Total lie.
It's in the same sense that Joe Biden is leading Trump in the polls with 10 points or 15 points.
Yeah.
Maybe
Corporate
Russell,
press, enemy of the people once again.
maybe that poll was taken in Constantia, Russell. So thank you, Mr. President.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President. Legend South African president. I'm so proud to have him. Imagine if we still had Zuma.
And that's, I think, the one of the big things that people need to realize is that the central narrative within South Africa is it's not that all the media and the elites and the commentariat are all captured by the Leninists or the EFF, but rather that they are captured by the group or the cult that is saying that the ANC can be reformed. If only we didn't have Zuma, we were on such a great path. If only we didn't have Zuma, we would have been Utopia and Wakanda by now. That is the dangerous group, not the EFF and the Leninists and the whatever. They're not in the picture. The people that are the real danger are the people that are saying, give the ANC another chance. It's just Zuma's legacy that's keeping us back. Cyril will save us. It's the new dawners, the dawners, that are the big problem. Not the. I don't care about the far left, man. I'm much more concerned about the people that are giving the ANC a free pass and that are acting as their PR team in the mainstream. Those are the dangerous.
Absolutely. I mean, the guys. What's his name? Adrian Basson and company. These guys are sycophants. It is ridiculously. It blows my mind. I mean. The thing is, it actually just angers me. I got myself into a lot of trouble over the last few months, and I had to patch up some relationships over with Cyril and my youth. Everybody's very quiet now, But I still had to patch up some relationships. But anyway.
Dylan, you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the dumb donors, but The one thing I was thinking about with the guns is if you think about it, and if you look at one of the things I studied in university was the Stalinist purges in the mid and late 1930s, and a lot of people couldn't understand why this was happening. So they're like, why would the communists? Because it wasn't targeted at the public, really. It was targeted within the party. And a lot of people were confused by this, like, why is this happening? And it was because partially that the communist revolution in Russia started out as a conspiracy, and it began to see conspiracies around it, whether they were there or not, because that's how they thought the world works. And I think to a certain extent, maybe not, your average corrupt or just whatever go along to get along official in the ANC thinks this, but like the real communists and whatnot, they started off an armed struggle and they are afraid of that sort of thing being turned upon them, whether real or not, or just resistance to or to their agenda. So I think there's a very concerted effort by a small minority of people within the ANC to make sure that guns do not go into the hands of people en masse, because essentially communist revolutionaries are paranoid. And I think that's largely the problem. So even though, yes, it would make their lives a lot easier, the crime rate would go down. They could say, see, because of the great policies of the ANC, crime has gone down in this country. They could say that, because of the murder rate goes down because of the now mass availability of firearms for self-defense, but they don't do that. And I think it's A, ideological, and B, this paranoia they have.
Did we, Dylan, were you making a Russian accent there, or what accent was that? I didn't.
He was making an
I
ANC
don't know. It was
It's pretty much a South African that went for Russian training.
So a communist South African's accent.
Yeah, exactly. That was what I was going to say. I was going to say an ANC guy who was trained in Russia. That was my accent.
cadre accent.
Ernst got it.
Yeah.
Cadre accent. Anyway, I think we've gone over an hour, well over an hour now. What I'd like to do, Ernst, if you're listening and you don't know who Ernst Van Zyl is or Conscious Caracal is, go and check out his channel. I put the link in the live chat for his channel. I will put the link in the description as well. Go and check out his channel. I'll put his link for his Twitter, which is the funnest part. No, I'm joking. Yeah, your YouTube is the best part. I'm kidding. So, Russell, do you want to say anything in closing?
No, look, I've said pretty much everything. It's been a lekker chat. You know, we went a little bit off on a rabbit hole a bit and discussed a couple of off the cuff things, but it was a good chat. I mean, you know, it's just people getting together and discussing ideas and encouraging each other and that sort of thing. But I just want to say thanks, Ernst, so much for your input. It's valued, and we must chat again soon.
Well, yeah, thank you very much for having me on. It was I thoroughly enjoyed the chat, and I think my final thoughts would definitely be that when you ask me for advice for your movement, whether that be whatever type of a secessionist movement or a cultural movement or a political movement, I'm not going to give you the encouraging, positive spin on it. I'm going to give you a very frank assessment in regards to what you need to do and what type of mindset you need to adopt. So when it comes to communities, when it comes to the Cape Secessionist movement, when it comes to the future of South Africa and political parties, my best advice to you would be the sooner that you embrace reality, the better. The longer that you keep preoccupied with utopian thinking or telling yourself beautiful fairy tales about in theory it's going to work, in theory it's going to work. That's not how reality works. So we don't live in a world of paper. Your theories might work on paper, but they're not going to work in the world of mortar, blood, and steel. So that would be my big advice: is all the best to all you anti-establishment guys out there. But you need to know that your path is going to be hard. Your path is going to be difficult. It's not going to be easy. But if you're willing to accept that fact, if you're willing to very genuinely commit yourself to a cause where you know you're going to be attacked and be slandered and be smeared, and people are going to try and ruin your life, people are going to try and make it very hard for you, and you take all that into account and still say, I'm still in, then all the best to you, man. Then you've got what it takes to succeed. Then you've got the same type of mentality that all the great men in history had. So all the best to the people that have that type of mentality, that bitter einder mentality, and to the oaks that don't, better start getting with the program, man, because optimism is cowardice.
Yeah, optimism is cowardice. So the idea, Ernst, and this is again, you know, I agree 100% with you. We're not here to get rainbows and unicorns and stuff, because we understand that these sort of things are very difficult to do. You know, all of our ancestors did them in the past, and they were very, very, very difficult. And you know, we need to now. I don't know. I guess we need to stand up now or lay down and die. D-Dog, you wanna add something there before we close off?
No, man, it was a great conversation. Thank you very much for coming on, Ernst. And think locally, act locally, and the corporate press is the enemy of the people.
And yeah, maybe just my final thought would be that don't take the black pill. Even though I am very frank and very, very realism based in regards to my advice, don't take a black pill, because black pills are just going to pacify you. That's what your ideological opponents want, is to want you to be just pacified by your anxiety and by your nihilism. Always have hope, but don't be too tempted or too much. Don't indulge too much in just thinking everything's going to work out all right. I don't have to do anything. I can just sit back and things will work out. That's not how the world works. That's not how Christianity views the world. Christianity says that it's up to you what you do. You're not a puppet. You have free will. You can either choose to take the short and narrow, or the thin and narrow road, or you can take the easy one. And that's your choice. And whether you succeed or not is going to be up to you. Your life isn't scripted in the regards that everything's just going to work out. I don't have to do anything. God still expects of you to do your shift and to do your part. And I think that's the message that I'd like to end on is don't take the black pill, but don't overdose on white pills either. Keep a nice balance there. Stay realistic, but at the same time, do keep some hope, because if everything was lost and everything was doomed, they wouldn't have to bombard you with all the propaganda that they are at the moment.
Amen. That's the whole thing. Be brave men and be brave in Christ. That's the idea, right? Don't ever give up, but sharpen your sword, pretty much. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, guys. Remember to subscribe, like, share this content. Hit the bell icon, I believe, to get notifications. Thank you so much for listening, guys. Stay reactionary out there, because
God wills it.
God wills it.